No, 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 not you.
Welcome, everyone. This home is our wedding gift.
Oh, wow.
Congratulations, my love, to our new beginning. Cheers.
I told you we'd do it. This is ours. Oh, my Lord, I can't believe it.
I arrived early enough to hear my daughter laughing before anyone noticed me, raising her champagne glass. Vanessa smiled at a room full of guests and said, "Mom finally gave us the house as our wedding gift. Tomorrow, it'll officially be ours." The applause echoed through the home my late husband and I had spent 42 years building one sacrifice at a time. Even Nathan thanked everyone, believing every word. I could have stopped the celebration right there. Instead, I smiled, set down my purse, and made a different decision. Before dessert, every single guest was going to tour this house and learn exactly who it truly belonged to. If this story touches your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me until the very end. Please like the video. If you've ever had to stay silent when speaking too soon, would only make things worse. Subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories with meaningful endings. And before we begin, tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were standing in my shoes? Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. People often think a house is just wood, brick, and glass. They see polished hardwood floors, antique chandeliers, or a wraparound porch overlooking oak trees draped in Spanish moss. They admire stained glass windows catching the afternoon sunlight, or the white columns standing proudly against a Charleston sky. Then they estimate its market value and move on. They rarely ask what the house cost before it ever had a price tag. My name is Laverne Hollowell, and I was 67 years old when my own daughter decided my home already belonged to her. Long before Charleston became one of the most desirable cities in the South, before tourists filled every sidewalk with cameras and carriage rides, my husband Thomas and I bought our Victorian house for what seemed like an impossible amount of money. Looking back now, it sounds almost laughable compared to today's prices, but 42 years ago, every dollar felt enormous. Thomas was a high school history teacher. I had just begun my career as an interior designer. Neither of us came from money. Our honeymoon had lasted exactly 4 days because we couldn't afford more. Our first dining table was rescued from a yard sale. Our couch had belonged to Thomas's grandmother. Our curtains were sewn by my own hands because custom ones were simply out of reach. But every evening after work, we'd stand in front of that old Victorian house and imagine what it could become. "It has good bones," Thomas always said. That became his favorite phrase. Whenever another repair bill appeared, whenever another storm damaged the roof, whenever termites invaded the back porch, whenever plumbing burst in the middle of winter, Thomas would smile, wipe the sweat from his forehead, and say exactly the same words. "It has good bones." Somehow those 4 words made every problem seem temporary. The first few years were exhausting. We couldn't hire contractors very often, so weekends became workdays. Thomas learned woodworking from library books. I learned restoration techniques from retired craftsmen who lived nearby. We replaced broken flooring one room at a time. We refinished old banisters. We repaired cracked plaster walls. Every Christmas bonus disappeared into another home improvement project. Friends vacationed in Florida. We replaced windows. Neighbors bought luxury cars. We repaired the foundation. Other couples upgraded wardrobes. We restored fireplaces. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. When Vanessa was born, we carried her through the front door wrapped in a pale yellow blanket my mother had knitted months before she passed away. Thomas insisted that before we even took her upstairs, we walk through every room together. "What are we doing?" I laughed. He looked down at our sleeping daughter. "Introducing her to home." He gently whispered into her tiny ear, "This house will always protect you." For years it did. Vanessa learned to crawl across those original pine floors. She took her first steps beside the staircase Thomas had refinished by hand. Every birthday party filled the backyard with balloons and laughter. Every Christmas morning began in front of the fireplace we'd restored ourselves. Every Thanksgiving, the dining room overflowed with cousins, neighbors, church friends, and anyone who didn't have another place to celebrate. Ours became the house where everyone gathered. Thomas loved that. I believed a home wasn't measured by square footage. It was measured by how many people felt welcome inside. When Vanessa turned 12, she asked if we were rich. I laughed. Why would you think that? She shrugged. Because everybody says we have the prettiest house. Thomas overheard us. He smiled. We're house rich and cash poor. Vanessa giggled. At the time, she understood exactly what he meant. Or at least I thought she did. Thomas died 7 years before the wedding. Cancer. Aggressive. Unfair. By the time doctors found it, treatment could only buy us time, not enough. The last evening we spent together was on the back porch watching the sun disappear behind the old oak trees. He held my hand for almost an hour without saying much. Then he quietly asked me something I have never forgotten. Promise me you'll keep living, I cried. I don't know how. You already do. No. You'll figure it out. After a long silence, he looked toward the house. And don't ever let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting what we built. At the time, I assumed he meant dishonest contractors or insurance companies. I never imagined he might have been preparing me for something much closer to home. After Thomas passed away, the house became painfully quiet. For months, I caught myself setting 2 coffee cups on the kitchen counter. I'd hear footsteps upstairs and momentarily believe he was still alive. Sometimes I'd wake up expecting to hear his radio playing classic jazz from the garage workshop. Grief is strange that way. It doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it slips into ordinary moments. An empty chair, an untouched toolbox, a jacket still hanging inside the hallway closet because moving it somehow feels like another goodbye. Eventually, I returned to work, although only part-time. Retirement suited me better than I expected. I redesigned historic homes for neighbors who appreciated preserving Charleston's character. The projects kept my hands busy. Busy hands gave the heart less time to ache. Vanessa visited often during those first years after her father died. She brought groceries. She insisted on mowing the lawn. She stayed for dinner nearly every Sunday. Those afternoons became precious. We cooked together, watched old movies, looked through family photo albums. Sometimes we'd laugh until we cried remembering Thomas's terrible jokes. For a while I truly believed grief had made us even closer. Then life slowly changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, just little things. Vanessa accepted a marketing position with a luxury hospitality company. She began attending charity galas, networking events, private fundraisers. She started talking about exclusive neighborhoods, designer furniture, investment portfolios, and social status. There was nothing wrong with ambition. Thomas and I had always encouraged her to dream bigger than we ever could. But somewhere along the way, success stopped being about building a meaningful life. It became about building an impressive one. Sunday dinners became monthly dinners. Monthly dinners became holiday visits. Phone calls grew shorter. Texts replaced conversations. Whenever she came over, she spent less time asking how I was and more time discussing property values. This neighborhood has doubled in value. You could sell for millions. People would fight over this location. I usually smiled. I don't want to sell. She'd nod politely, but her eyes wandered around the house like she was calculating something invisible. The first time she referred to it differently, I barely noticed. We were standing on the front porch after lunch. She admired the blooming hydrangeas lining the walkway. Then she smiled. You know, one day this place will stay in the family. I agreed. I hope so. She laughed. Our future kids are going to love growing up here. The sentence sounded harmless, even sweet. I assumed she simply meant someday, many years from now. After all, parents often leave homes to their children. There was nothing unusual about that, or so I believed. Months later, Nathan came for dinner. He was courteous, well-mannered, quick to help clear the dishes without anyone asking. He complimented the restoration work throughout the house. This place has incredible history, he said while admiring the staircase. I smiled proudly. It certainly does. Vanessa wrapped her arm around his. We've already talked about keeping everything exactly like this. We. The word lingered in my mind. Nathan simply smiled. I smiled back. But for the first time, something deep inside me whispered that perhaps my daughter and I were no longer imagining the same future for this house. And I had no idea just how dangerous that misunderstanding was about to become. The first time Vanessa asked me to sign the papers, she made it sound like the most ordinary favor in the world. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in early March. Charleston wore that quiet gray color it sometimes borrowed from the Atlantic, and the steady rhythm of rain against the kitchen windows made the whole house feel smaller and warmer. I had just finished baking lemon pound cake using Thomas's favorite recipe when the doorbell rang. Vanessa stepped inside carrying a leather portfolio instead of her usual oversized handbag. She hugged me. "Something smells wonderful." "Lemon pound cake. I haven't had this in years. You always loved it." "I still do." For a moment, she looked exactly like the little girl who used to steal warm slices before dinner. We made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, talked about work. Nathan's construction company had just secured another commercial development. The wedding planning was moving quickly. Flowers had been chosen. The church reserved. Guests were already mailing RSVP cards. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until she slid the leather portfolio across the table. "Oh," she said casually, "there's one little thing I wanted to ask." I looked down at the folder. "What is it?" "Just some paperwork." "For what?" She shrugged as though the answer barely mattered. "My financial planner suggested we organize family documents before the wedding." I frowned. "What kind of family documents?" "You know, estate planning." The words immediately caught my attention. "I already have an estate plan." "I know. So why would I need another one?" She smiled patiently. "It's just updating everything." I opened the folder. The stack inside was thicker than I expected. Perhaps 30 pages, maybe more. Some carried legal letterhead. Others contained signature lines marked with bright yellow sticky tabs. I turned several pages. Most of the language was unfamiliar. Dense paragraphs, legal terminology, property descriptions, tax references. "I don't understand any of this." "You don't need to." She laughed softly. "It's all standard. Whenever someone tells you not to worry because something is standard, that's usually the moment you should start paying attention." "I'd rather read it carefully." "You can. I mean every page." She sighed almost imperceptibly. "It really isn't necessary." "I think it is." She reached across the table and tapped one of the yellow markers. "The attorney already explained everything." "Whose attorney?" "Ours." I looked up. "Ours." She smiled again. "Nathan's family attorney." I closed the folder. "I've never met him." "Well, he doesn't represent me." Her smile faded for only a second. "It would just save time." "Time for what?" "So everything's organized before we're married." I nodded slowly. "I'll have Margaret look at it." That sentence changed the atmosphere immediately. Margaret Ellis had been my closest friend for nearly 40 years. We met before either of us had children. While I became an interior designer, Margaret attended law school. Eventually, she specialized in real estate law and spent decades protecting families from complicated property disputes. If there was one person I trusted with legal documents, it was Margaret. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. "Do you really need another lawyer?" "Margaret isn't another lawyer. She's retired." "She's still capable of reading." Vanessa forced a laugh. "It just seems unnecessary." I gently pushed the folder toward myself. "If everything is routine, Margaret will tell me." She didn't argue, not directly. Instead, she changed the subject. She complimented the flowers outside, asked whether I planned to repaint the guest bedroom, mentioned a new restaurant opening downtown. But I noticed something that afternoon I hadn't seen before. She kept glancing toward the leather folder, almost nervously, as though she hoped I'd forget about it. The following morning I called Margaret. She answered on the second ring. "Well, hello, stranger. I have coffee." "I'm listening." "And lemon pound cake. I'll be there in 20 minutes." Some friendships never change. Margaret arrived wearing jeans, a navy raincoat, and reading glasses already hanging around her neck. She hugged me tightly. We chatted for a while before I finally placed the folder in front of her. "Can you tell me if I'm worrying over nothing?" She adjusted her glasses. "I certainly can." She opened the first page, then the second, then the third. Her expression slowly changed. She stopped smiling. By page 5, she wasn't eating cake anymore. By page 8, she reached for a yellow highlighter she carried inside her purse. Without saying a word, she continued reading for nearly 20 minutes. The only sounds in my kitchen were turning pages and rain tapping against the windows. Finally, she removed her glasses. "Laverne." Her voice had become noticeably quieter. "Did Vanessa tell you what these documents actually do? Estate planning." Margaret stared at me. "No." I felt my stomach tighten. "What are they?" She pointed toward a paragraph buried in the middle of one page. "This section transfers immediate ownership of your residence." I blinked. "I'm sorry." She slid the document toward me. "This isn't about inheritance after your death." She pointed again. "It's effective immediately upon execution." "I don't understand." "You would no longer own this house." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because my mind refused to accept what I'd just heard. "That can't be right." "I wish it weren't." Margaret continued flipping pages. "Here." Another paragraph. "And here." Then another. "These are warranty deed provisions." She looked directly into my eyes. "If you signed this package exactly as presented," she paused, "Vanessa would become the legal owner." I felt cold despite the warm kitchen. "There has to be some mistake." Margaret slowly shook her head. "No." "Maybe they used the wrong forms." "No." "Maybe the attorney mixed files." "No." The certainty in her voice frightened me more than the documents themselves. I stood and walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, rainwater rolled across the brick walkway Thomas had laid by hand decades earlier. I remembered him kneeling there every Saturday for nearly 2 months. One brick at a time. One careful measurement after another. "This doesn't make any sense." Margaret remained silent. After several moments, I turned around. "She wouldn't do this." "I hope not." "So there must be another explanation." "I sincerely hope there is." Neither of us spoke for a long while. Eventually, I asked the question that had quietly formed inside my mind. "If I had signed these," Margaret answered before I finished, "you would have transferred one of the most valuable historic homes in Charleston without receiving a single dollar." I sat back down. "I raised her." "I know." "I taught her honesty." "I know." "I don't understand." Margaret reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "People don't always become dishonest overnight." "What do you mean?" "It usually starts with justification." Justification. People convince themselves they're only borrowing, or speeding up something that would happen eventually, or claiming what they believe they'll inherit anyway. Every sentence landed heavier than the last. "You think Vanessa believes this house already belongs to her?" Margaret sighed. "I don't know what Vanessa believes. But someone prepared these documents intentionally. And someone expected you to sign them." I looked again at the neat yellow tabs marking each signature line. There were 6 places waiting for my name. 6 opportunities to surrender everything Thomas and I had spent 42 years building, without ever realizing it. That evening, Vanessa called. "Did you get a chance to look everything over?" "I did." "And I haven't signed anything." A pause. "Oh." "I had Margaret review the documents." Silence. Then another pause, longer this time. Finally, she spoke. "What did she say?" I chose my words carefully. "She said I shouldn't sign them." Vanessa laughed, but the sound felt forced. "She's old-fashioned." "No. Things are different now." "I still won't sign." Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice had become noticeably colder. "I thought you trusted me." "I do." "Then why would you question paperwork?" "Because paperwork lasts longer than conversations." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she simply said she had another call to take and ended our conversation sooner than usual. I stood in my living room staring at the family photographs covering the fireplace mantel. One picture showed Thomas holding 5-year-old Vanessa on his shoulders during a 4th of July parade. Both of them were laughing, both looking toward the future. I wondered what Thomas would have said if he'd been standing beside me. Then I remembered his final words. Don't ever let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting what we built. At that moment, for the first time, I realized this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding that disappeared with one honest conversation. Something much larger had already begun, and I feared my daughter was standing at the very center of it. After discovering what those documents really contained, I expected everything to change. I imagined Vanessa would call the next morning, apologize, and explain there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Perhaps the attorney had prepared the wrong packet. Perhaps someone in the office had mixed up another client's paperwork. Perhaps Nathan had never seen those documents. I spent 3 days inventing explanations that allowed me to keep believing the daughter I had raised would never intentionally deceive me. None of them came true. Instead, life moved forward exactly as though nothing had happened. Wedding planning accelerated. The florist called asking about delivery times. The caterer wanted access to my kitchen. The rental company needed measurements for tents and tables. A quartet requested permission to rehearse in the backyard. The house suddenly became the center of everyone else's schedule. And somehow I was the only one who still thought it belonged to me. Vanessa visited almost every afternoon during the month before the wedding. If someone had walked into the house without knowing our relationship, they would have assumed she was already the homeowner. She carried a clipboard, made lists, answered phone calls with remarkable confidence. She spoke quickly, always sounding as though she had 10 important decisions waiting. Move those chairs into the sunroom. No, those flowers should stay near the staircase. I want white roses in the dining room. The welcome table goes in the front hall. At first, every request sounded reasonable. After all, I wanted her wedding to be beautiful. I told myself she was simply excited. But excitement slowly became authority. One Thursday morning, I walked downstairs carrying a basket of laundry and found 2 young men removing a large mahogany cabinet from the living room. I nearly dropped the basket. What are you doing? One of the movers smiled politely. We're relocating this piece. Who asked you to? He looked surprised. Miss Hollowell. I glanced toward the foyer just as Vanessa entered carrying 2 coffee cups. Oh, good, she said cheerfully. They're already here. I stared at the cabinet. Why is my furniture being moved? She spoke as though the answer were obvious. The dance floor needs more room. You never asked me. I knew you'd say yes. That's not the point. She handed me a coffee. We're just putting it in the library for a few days. I looked back at this cabinet. Thomas and I had purchased it during our 25th anniversary trip to Savannah. We had saved for nearly a year. Inside were family photo albums, handwritten letters, and my mother's china. It wasn't just furniture. It was memory. I'll move everything myself, I said quietly. Vanessa sighed. Mom, I don't want strangers carrying it. They're professionals. I'll still do it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she nodded. Fine. The movers stood awkwardly while I carefully removed every fragile item one piece at a time. Neither of them had done anything wrong. They were simply following instructions. The problem wasn't them. The problem was the person giving the instructions. 2 days later, another surprise arrived. I came home after lunch with Margaret to discover paint samples taped across the dining room wall. Cream, soft gray, warm ivory. A young woman wearing designer overalls smiled brightly. You must be Mrs. Hollowell. I am. I'm Emily. She extended her hand. I'm the interior painter. The what? Miss Hollowell hired us. My stomach tightened. For which room? She looked around. We're repainting the dining room foyer and upstairs hallway. No, Emily blinked. I'm sorry. No. She glanced toward her clipboard. I have a signed contract. I don't care. Miss Hollowell approved everything. I didn't. Emily looked genuinely uncomfortable. I I don't understand. This house belongs to me. The young painter immediately lowered her clipboard. I think I'd better make a phone call. Within 20 minutes, Vanessa arrived looking irritated rather than embarrassed. Mom, why did you stop them? Because nobody asked me. It's just paint. No. It's only cosmetic. No. She folded her arms. The darker colors make the house feel outdated. I looked around the dining room. Every wall had been painted by Thomas and me the summer before he became sick. He had insisted on brushing every corner himself because he claimed I was too much of a perfectionist. Whenever visitors complimented the room, he'd grin proudly and whisper, "I did the trim." That trim still looked exactly as he'd left it. No one's repainting this room. Vanessa exhaled loudly. You have to stop treating everything like a museum. It's my home. It's going to be our wedding. My home. For one weekend. My home. The conversation ended there. Emily quietly packed her supplies. Before leaving, she apologized several times, even though she had absolutely nothing to apologize for. I felt terrible for her. Later that evening, Margaret came by carrying Chinese takeout. She found me sitting alone in the living room. You look exhausted. I am. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her tea. Laverne. Start documenting everything. What do you mean, everything? She pulled a small notebook from her purse. Every vendor. Every invoice. Every conversation. Every unauthorized change. I frowned. You think I'll need all of this? I hope not. But hope isn't a legal strategy. She handed me the notebook. Take photographs. Write dates. Save emails. Keep text messages. I laughed weakly. I feel ridiculous. You'll feel even more ridiculous if you need evidence and don't have it. Margaret had spent 40 years solving property disputes. She knew exactly how quickly memory became unreliable once emotions took over. The next morning, I bought several storage boxes. Inside one, I placed copies of every wedding-related document that came through my house. Vendor contracts, receipts, delivery schedules, emails, invoices, everything. I also began taking photographs. At first it felt silly. A picture of furniture being moved, a picture of floral arrangements, a picture of painters measuring walls. But after a week, patterns began appearing. Vanessa never asked. She informed. She never suggested. She instructed. She rarely said, "Would you mind?" Instead, she said things like, "We're replacing these curtains. We're moving this table. We're storing these family portraits. We'll use your study as the bridal suite." Your study, not may we not, would that be okay? Simply a decision already made. One afternoon, I overheard something that unsettled me even more. I had gone upstairs to retrieve extra towels when I heard Vanessa speaking with the wedding planner downstairs. The library furniture can go after the honeymoon. The planner asked, "Where?" "We'll probably donate most of it." I froze. Donate it? The planner sounded uncertain. Are you sure? Vanessa laughed. I'll be redecorating the entire first floor. My hands tightened around the towel. Redecorating. Not for the wedding. After it. As though she had already decided what my house would become once she moved in. I quietly stepped back before either of them noticed me. That evening, I walked through every room alone. The library, the music room, Thomas's workshop, the guest bedroom where my parents had stayed every Christmas, the upstairs hallway, marked with pencil lines measuring Vanessa's height from age 5 until she left for college. Each mark carried a date, a memory, a piece of our family. Standing there, I finally admitted something I had resisted for weeks. This was no longer about wedding excitement. It wasn't stress. It wasn't poor communication. Vanessa wasn't acting like someone hoping to inherit the house one day. She was behaving like someone who genuinely believed she already owned it. And perhaps the most frightening part wasn't her confidence. It was how easily everyone around her seemed willing to believe it too. I closed the hallway closet, looked at Thomas's old toolbox, resting exactly where he had left it years ago, and whispered the words he had repeated through every difficult season of our marriage. It has good bones. Then I smiled sadly. So do I. And unlike this house, I wasn't going to let anyone renovate me into someone who surrendered everything simply to keep the peace. The wedding invitations had been mailed for nearly 3 weeks when I realized the house was no longer the only thing Vanessa had promised away. Until then, I believed her deception ended with those unsigned property documents and the assumptions she encouraged everyone to make. I was wrong. Much, much wrong. The discovery came on a quiet Friday morning because of something as ordinary as fresh hydrangeas. Every week I visited the Charleston Farmers Market to buy flowers. It had become a ritual after Thomas died. He used to tease me that no matter how beautiful our garden became, I'd always find an excuse to buy one more bouquet. "You'll put florists out of business if you ever stop decorating," he'd joke. That morning I was arranging pale blue hydrangeas into a ceramic pitcher when my phone rang. "Margaret, you busy?" "Only arguing with flowers," she laughed. "I need you to meet me for lunch." "Everything all right?" "I think so." That wasn't the answer I wanted. "When?" "An hour." "Where?" "The Harbor Grill." Her voice sounded calm, but after 40 years of friendship I knew when calm was hiding concern. By noon we were sitting beside large windows overlooking Charleston Harbor. Sailboats drifted across the water, while tourists wandered along the waterfront promenade. Margaret waited until the waiter left before speaking. "I ran into someone yesterday." "Who?" "Douglas Mercer." The name meant nothing to me. Should I know him? "He invests in boutique hotels." I shrugged. "I still don't know him." "You've never met him. So why are we discussing him?" Margaret stirred her iced tea slowly. "Because he believes your house is becoming an event property." I blinked. "What?" He asked whether your renovations were finished. "My renovations?" He congratulated me. "For what?" "For helping your daughter close the property transfer." For several seconds I simply stared at her. "What property transfer?" "Exactly." I felt my heartbeat quicken. Margaret reached into her purse and removed a folded business card. "Dallas? No, Douglas Mercer." She slid it across the table. "I met him during a Preservation Society fundraiser." "What did he say?" "He recognized my name. And he mentioned that Vanessa had spoken very highly of me." I felt cold. "He said he was excited about future business opportunities." "What business opportunities?" Margaret took a slow breath. "He believes your Victorian home will become an exclusive event venue after the honeymoon." I leaned back in my chair. "No, I'm afraid so." "She never told me any of this." "I don't think she intended to." I looked toward the harbor, but I wasn't seeing boats anymore. I was seeing Thomas restoring porch railings in the summer heat. I was seeing Christmas dinners around our oak table, birthday candles, anniversary dances in the living room. Our home had never been a business, it had been our life. Margaret continued quietly. Douglas mentioned wedding receptions, corporate dinners, historical tours, luxury weekend rentals. I slowly shook my head. "That's impossible." "He believes contracts are already being discussed." I whispered almost to myself. "She's making plans for a house she doesn't own." Margaret nodded. "And other people believe her." Lunch ended without either of us touching much of our food. On the drive home, I kept replaying every conversation Vanessa and I had shared over the previous year. Property values, neighborhood appreciation, future renovations, investment potential. At the time, I thought she simply admired the house. Now those conversations sounded different, like someone studying an asset instead of remembering a home. That Saturday afternoon, another unexpected visitor arrived. Nathan. He stood on my front porch carrying a toolbox. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." He smiled warmly. "I remembered you mentioning the back gate doesn't latch properly." I blinked. "You came to fix it." "If that's okay." For the next hour, we worked together in the backyard. Well, Nathan worked. I mostly handed him tools. Watching him reminded me a little of Thomas. Not because they looked alike. They didn't. but both men believed problems should be solved with their hands before they were solved with words. Eventually, the gate closed perfectly. There, Nathan smiled proudly. Good as new. Thank you. My pleasure. We sat on the porch drinking iced tea afterward. Conversation drifted naturally from work to family. He asked about Thomas. I told him stories. He laughed at Thomas's habit of buying old tools at flea markets simply because they deserved another chance. Then Nathan looked across the backyard. I've been thinking. About what? The pavilion. What pavilion? He smiled. The one we're planning. I frowned slightly. In the back garden. I remained silent. You know, he pointed toward the old oak tree. For weddings and private dinners. I looked directly at him. What pavilion? He laughed. Vanessa said you loved the idea. I've never heard about it. His smile slowly faded. Oh. I thought. He stopped speaking. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. He recovered quickly. Maybe she just hadn't mentioned it yet. Maybe. But I noticed something. Nathan genuinely looked confused. Not defensive. Not guilty. Confused. A few minutes later, he continued talking. I've already been sketching ideas. I listened carefully. Nothing permanent. Just something elegant. So the property could host small events. Property. Again, not house. Property. I thought it could become a nice family business. Family business. He honestly believed he was discussing our future together, not taking something away from me. That realization hurt in an entirely different way. Nathan wasn't acting entitled. I was acting informed. Someone had informed him. Someone he trusted completely. When he left, he thanked me again for the tea. Before driving away, he smiled. I'm really looking forward to making wonderful memories here. I stood in the driveway waving until his truck disappeared around the corner. Then I whispered softly, you already would have. If someone had simply told you the truth. That evening I called Margaret. I don't think Nathan knows. I've been wondering the same thing. He talked about future renovations. Did he sound manipulative? No. He sounded excited. Margaret remained quiet. I think he's another victim. I agree. That realization changed everything. Until then, I had believed this conflict existed between my daughter and me. Now another possibility emerged. Perhaps Vanessa hadn't simply lied to me. Perhaps she'd built an entirely different reality for everyone around her. Sunday morning brought one final surprise. After church, several longtime neighbors gathered outside beneath the oak trees for coffee and pastries. Mrs. Caldwell, who had lived across the street for nearly 30 years, smiled warmly. We're so excited for Vanessa. So am I. She patted my arm. It must be comforting knowing the house will stay in the family. I looked at her. What do you mean? Oh. She looked surprised. Vanessa told everyone she'd inherited it early. Inherited it early. The phrase echoed inside my mind. Not someday. Already. Another neighbor joined the conversation. It'll be wonderful seeing young children growing up there again. Someone else added, and those weekend weddings will be beautiful. I forced a smile. I suppose we'll see. They continued chatting happily, completely unaware that every sentence felt like another stone settling on my chest. By the time I returned home, one painful truth had become impossible to ignore. This wasn't one careless lie. It wasn't one misunderstanding. It wasn't even one forged expectation. Vanessa had repeated the same story so many times to so many different people that it had become accepted as fact. Friends believed it. Neighbors believed it. Business investors believed it. Wedding vendors believed it. Nathan believed it. Perhaps the only person who still understood the truth was me. That afternoon, Margaret came over carrying several certified county records she had requested earlier in the week. She spread them across my dining room table. Original deed, property tax history, mortgage satisfaction records. Every document proving uninterrupted ownership. She looked at me carefully. You've been very quiet. I've been thinking. About what? I've spent weeks asking how I should stop Vanessa. Margaret nodded. And now, I slowly looked around the dining room. Every chair, every window, every photograph. Then I looked back at my oldest friend. I think I've been asking the wrong question. She raised one eyebrow. The real question isn't how to stop her. No. I slowly shook my head. It's how to let everyone else discover the truth themselves. Margaret studied me for several seconds. Then, for the first time since this nightmare had begun, she smiled. I was hoping you'd finally say that. After Margaret smiled, neither of us spoke for several moments. She simply gathered the certified property records into neat stacks and slid them back inside her leather briefcase. The gesture seemed almost ceremonial. Evidence prepared, truth preserved. Now all that remained was deciding when the truth should finally step into the light. I don't want to embarrass her, I said quietly. Margaret looked at me over the rim of her glasses. I know. I still love my daughter. I know. I don't want revenge. I know that too. She reached across the dining room table and gently rested her hand over mine. Laverne, protecting yourself and humiliating someone are two different things. I keep reminding myself of that. You aren't creating this situation. No. You're responding to it. Those words stayed with me long after she left. For days I replayed them in my mind, whenever guilt tried to convince me I was somehow responsible for the growing tension. Grief teaches you many things. One of them is that love doesn't disappear simply because trust has been broken. I still loved Vanessa. That was exactly what made everything hurt so much. The following Monday, the house became even busier. Delivery trucks began arriving before breakfast. Boxes of candles, crystal glassware, white folding chairs, fresh linens. The driveway looked more like the entrance to an event venue than the home Thomas and I had spent 4 decades restoring. Every contractor seemed to know exactly where to go. Every florist knew which room belonged to the bride. Every decorator carried a schedule printed with military precision. Only one person never seemed to appear on those schedules. Me. I found myself stepping aside in my own hallway, while strangers rolled carts across antique rugs. Someone politely asked whether they could use my laundry room to store cleaning supplies. Another vendor requested access to the upstairs guest room for bridal accessories. Each request was courteous. Each person believed they had permission. None of them realized nobody had actually asked the homeowner. Around noon, Vanessa swept through the front door with her phone pressed against one ear. Yes, she said confidently. Everything's under control. She noticed me standing near the staircase and smiled before continuing her conversation. The rehearsal dinner guests will park along the east side of the property. Property. Again. Not home, not Mom's house. Property. She ended the call and tucked the phone into her purse. Morning. Morning. You look tired. So do you. She laughed. I'll sleep after the honeymoon. I hope you do. For a brief second, the conversation almost felt normal. Then she unfolded another clipboard. I need to talk to you about the upstairs. What about it? I've decided the primary bedroom will be the bridal suite. I stared at her. My bedroom. It has the best lighting. It's also where I sleep. Just for one night. I'll stay somewhere else. The sentence came so natural that she didn't even seem to hear herself say it. I looked at her carefully. You've decided I'll stay somewhere else. It'll just be easier. Easier for whom? She sighed. Mom? No. It's one night. No. The photographer wants those windows. No. She folded her arms. You're making this harder than it has to be. I don't think I am. She looked genuinely frustrated. You always taught me to be flexible. I also taught you to ask permission. Silence settled between us. Finally, she forced a smile. Fine. We'll use the guest room. She turned and walked toward the foyer before adding over her shoulder, I've got about 50 other problems today. When the front door closed, I leaned against the staircase railing. Thomas had refinished with his own hands. It struck me that Vanessa hadn't apologized. She hadn't even realized why her request was inappropriate. She truly believed rearranging my life inside my own home was perfectly reasonable. That realization hurt more than the request itself. Later that afternoon, my younger sister Carol arrived carrying 2 garment bags. Carol lived in Savannah and rarely involved herself in family disagreements. She had always preferred peace over confrontation. She hugged me tightly. "How are you holding up?" "I've had better weeks." She looked around the crowded living room. "It's beautiful." "It is. I'm excited for Vanessa." "So am I." She hesitated. "Laverne. I hope you aren't planning to argue during the wedding." There it was. The conversation I had been expecting. "I don't plan to argue." "Good." She looked relieved. "You only get one chance at a wedding. You also only get one chance to tell the truth." Carol frowned. "What does that mean?" I smiled gently. "It means exactly what it sounds like." She sat beside me on the sofa. "I know you and Vanessa have had disagreements. It's more complicated than that. I just don't want anyone getting hurt." I looked toward the front porch where workers were unloading floral arrangements. "Someone already has." Carol remained quiet. After a long pause, she asked softly, "Can you let it go until after the honeymoon?" I thought about Thomas. About 42 years of mortgage payments, weekend renovations, cancer treatments, his final request: "Don't ever let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting what we built." "No." She looked disappointed. "Laverne, I won't ruin the wedding. I promise you that. But I also won't participate in a lie." Carol sighed. "I wish things were simpler." "So do I." She reached for my hand. "I just want my nieces and nephews growing up together one day." "So do I." "Then don't burn the bridge." I smiled sadly. "I'm not the one holding the matches." That evening, after everyone left, I walked through the quiet house alone. The workers would return tomorrow. More decorations, more deliveries, more assumptions. The sun had already begun disappearing behind the massive live oaks surrounding the property. Golden light filtered through stained glass windows, painting soft colors across the hardwood floor. Thomas used to call this the house's favorite hour. He believed every home had a moment each day when it seemed to breathe. Standing in the foyer, I could almost hear his footsteps, almost hear his laughter echoing from the workshop, almost imagine him walking through the front door, carrying another flea market treasure that absolutely did not need repairing, but somehow always ended up becoming beautiful again. I wandered into the library. The bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Thousands of volumes collected over our marriage. History, architecture, gardening, biographies, travel journals. Every shelf reminded me of evenings spent reading together while rain tapped against the windows. No investor would ever understand that value. No appraisal could calculate it. No market report could assign a price to 42 years of ordinary happiness. My eyes settled on a framed photograph resting beside Thomas's old reading chair. It showed the three of us on Vanessa's first day of college. She stood between us wearing a university sweatshirt, smiling so broadly her eyes almost disappeared. Thomas had whispered to me after that picture was taken, "Promise me something." "What?" "If she ever loses her way," he paused, "help her find it. Not punish her, not abandon her, help her." For the first time since discovering the paperwork, I finally understood what that might require. Helping someone find their way doesn't always mean protecting them from consequences. Sometimes it means allowing the truth to become impossible to ignore. I picked up the photograph and carefully dusted the frame. "I haven't forgotten," I whispered. "I'll do my best." The next morning, Margaret arrived carrying another slim folder. "No emergencies," she said before I could ask. "Just preparation." She placed several certified copies of the county ownership records on the dining room table. "If anyone questions the truth, these speak for themselves." I nodded. "When the time comes," she smiled knowingly, "you won't need to raise your voice." I looked at the folder, then around the house that had witnessed nearly every important moment of my adult life. For weeks, everyone had been preparing for a wedding. Quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. I had been preparing for something else. The moment when the truth would finally walk through my front door, alongside every guest who believed they already knew the story. Wedding mornings are strange things. They begin long before the sun rises, yet they seem to disappear before anyone notices the hours passing. I woke at 5:30, not because of an alarm, but because the house itself seemed restless. Car doors opened outside. Vendors rolled equipment across the driveway. Someone laughed near the front porch. The florist's delivery truck pulled up before dawn, its headlights sweeping across the old oak trees that had stood watch over this property for more than a century. For a moment, I remained in bed staring at the ceiling. Thomas and I had repaired together after Hurricane Hugo left a crack running nearly 8 feet across it. He had refused to hire anyone. "We've survived worse," he had said. He was right, we always had. As I got dressed, I chose a navy blue dress instead of the silver one Vanessa had picked out for me months earlier. The silver dress was beautiful, elegant, but somehow it no longer felt honest. The navy one had been Thomas's favorite. "You look like yourself in blue," he used to tell me. Today, more than anything, I wanted to look like myself, not someone pretending everything was normal. By 7 o'clock, the kitchen was already filled with activity. Caterers arranged trays of pastries. Coffee brewed in enormous silver urns. Someone carried fresh fruit into the dining room. The smell of cinnamon rolls mixed with fresh flowers, until the entire house felt both festive and unfamiliar. One young server smiled politely. "You must be Mrs. Hollowell." "I am. This home is absolutely incredible." "Thank you." She looked around with admiration. "Your daughter told us it'll be even more beautiful after the renovations." I simply smiled. "I hope today is beautiful enough." She nodded enthusiastically before hurrying back to work, never realizing the weight her innocent comment carried. By 8 o'clock, the bridal party had arrived. Laughter floated upstairs. Hairstylists plugged in curling irons. Makeup artists unpacked brushes across folding tables. Bridesmaids hurried from room to room carrying garment bags and bouquets. Everywhere I looked, people were celebrating. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, I found myself smiling. Not because I had forgotten. Because I remembered something Thomas often said. Never let someone else's mistakes steal your ability to appreciate a beautiful day. Outside, the weather was perfect. Charleston seemed determined to give Vanessa everything she had dreamed about. The sky stretched clear and brilliantly blue. A light breeze moved through the Spanish moss hanging from the old oaks. The garden shimmered beneath the morning sun. Even the birds seemed louder than usual. If someone had taken photographs that morning, they would have captured nothing but happiness. Photographs rarely tell the whole story. Around 9 o'clock, Nathan knocked softly on the library door, where I had escaped for a few quiet moments. "May I come in?" Of course. He looked handsome in a tailored charcoal suit, nervous, excited. His tie wasn't quite straight. I smiled. "Come here." He laughed. I knew something was wrong with it. I adjusted the knot the same way I used to fix Thomas's before church every Sunday. "There. Perfect. Thank you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Nathan looked around the library. "I've always loved this room." "So have I." "The woodwork." He ran his hand lightly across one of the shelves. "They don't build houses like this anymore." "No, they certainly don't." He smiled. "I've been thinking." I almost laughed. "So I've heard." He looked confused. "I wanted to tell you something before everything gets busy." "I'm listening." "I know Vanessa and I have talked a lot about the future." I remained quiet. "But I want you to know." He hesitated. "I hope this house always feels like your home." The sentence surprised me. He continued before I could respond. "I never want you to think we're trying to replace memories." I looked into his eyes. There wasn't even a hint of manipulation, only sincerity. "I appreciate that, Nathan." He smiled with obvious relief. "I just wanted you to know." "I do." As he turned to leave, he paused. "Oh, what is it?" "I still can't believe how generous you've been." There it was again. The assumption. Not arrogance, not greed. Belief. Someone had carefully built that belief inside him, and he trusted the person who had built it. When he left, I whispered quietly, "I'm sorry." Not because of anything he had done, because I already knew the day ahead would break his heart too. By 10:30, the ceremony site at the church was ready. Guests began arriving in elegant dresses and dark suits. Luxury cars lined both sides of the street. Family members embraced after months apart. Children chased one another across the church lawn, while photographers captured every smiling face. As mother of the bride, I stood near the entrance greeting guests. Everyone complimented the wedding, the flowers, the weather, the beautiful historic home where the reception would be held. Again and again, I heard nearly identical comments. "You've given them such an incredible start. What an amazing wedding gift. They're so lucky." I thanked each person politely. Not once did I correct anyone. Not yet. Margaret arrived just before the ceremony. She wore a simple emerald green dress and carried a small leather briefcase that never left her side. Most people assumed it contained ordinary paperwork. Only she and I knew what rested inside. As she approached, she gave me the smallest nod imaginable. Everything was ready. Nothing more needed to be said. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Pastor Samuel Brooks spoke about commitment, patience, faith, the courage required to build a marriage that could survive disappointment as well as joy. Several times I found tears filling my eyes. Not because I doubted Vanessa loved Nathan. I believed she did. That was part of the tragedy. Love had become tangled with ambition until she could no longer separate one from the other. When Pastor Brooks asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" I stood. My voice remained steady. "I do." For a brief moment, Vanessa looked at me with genuine affection. The little girl I remembered seemed to return. She smiled exactly the way she had smiled on the first day of kindergarten when she squeezed my hand before walking into her classroom. It almost made me wonder whether I had imagined everything. Almost. The ceremony ended beneath warm applause. Guests showered the newlyweds with flower petals. The photographer directed everyone into endless combinations of family portraits. Parents, grandparents, bridesmaids, college friends, neighbors, business associates. Between photographs, Vanessa hugged me tightly. "We did it." "Yes, we're finally married." "You are." "Thank you for everything." I looked into her eyes. "I truly hope you're happy." "I've never been happier." "I believe you." She smiled brightly before hurrying away toward another group photograph. Margaret quietly stepped beside me. "How are you holding up?" "I expected to be angrier." "And I'm mostly sad." She nodded gently. "That's because you're still seeing your daughter." "I don't want to stop." "You won't." We watched Nathan laughing with his groomsmen across the church courtyard. "He still doesn't know," I whispered. "No." "I almost wish someone had warned him." Margaret looked toward the newlyweds. "Sometimes truth arrives exactly when it has to." I slowly nodded. Soon everyone began driving back toward my Victorian home for the reception. The celebration everyone had spent months preparing for was finally about to begin. As I watched the line of cars disappear down the oak-lined streets of Charleston, I reached into my handbag and quietly touched the small brass key Thomas had always carried. I had placed it there that morning without really knowing why. Now I understood. It wasn't a key to the house anymore. It was a reminder. Some doors should only be opened when the right people are standing on the other side. And before the afternoon was over, I intended to open one that no lie would ever be able to close again. By the time we returned from the church, the old Victorian house looked as though it had stepped out of a Southern bridal magazine. White roses framed the front porch. Crystal lanterns hung from the massive oak branches. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers across the garden. The long reception tables shimmered beneath ivory linen's polished silver, and hundreds of tiny candles waiting for sunset. For one brief moment, I forgot everything else. The house was beautiful. Thomas would have loved seeing it filled with people again. He always believed homes should echo with conversation, children laughing, friends embracing, music floating through open windows. Today, all of those things had returned. I only wished they had returned under different circumstances. As guests stepped through the front door, I greeted each of them personally. Some were neighbors who had watched Vanessa grow up. Others were former classmates. Several were Nathan's relatives visiting Charleston for the first time. Many paused just inside the foyer. My goodness! I've never seen such craftsmanship. This staircase is incredible. The stained glass is breathtaking. Every compliment filled me with pride, not because they admired the house, because they unknowingly admired 42 years of love. A house like this cannot be created with money alone. It requires patience, sacrifice, shared dreams, thousands of ordinary days. Across the room, Vanessa looked radiant. Her wedding gown sparkled beneath the afternoon sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows. Nathan couldn't seem to stop smiling. Every time someone congratulated them, they hugged, laughed, and thanked their guests warmly. Watching them together, I found myself remembering another wedding. Mine, 43 years earlier. Thomas had worn a rented tuxedo because buying one was beyond our budget. Our reception had taken place in my parents' church fellowship hall. My aunt baked the cake. Our honeymoon consisted of driving to Savannah for 4 days because gas alone had strained our finances. We hadn't started our marriage with wealth. We had started it with trust. That difference suddenly felt enormous. Around 4 o'clock, the reception officially began. Pastor Samuel offered a blessing over the meal. Everyone took their seats. Conversations filled every corner of the house. Laughter rose from the dining room. Wine glasses clinked together beneath the old chandelier Thomas had spent nearly 3 weekends restoring after finding it in pieces at an estate sale. Life, at least from the outside, looked perfect. The meal itself passed peacefully. Guests complimented the food. Old friends exchanged stories. Children wandered through the garden chasing butterflies. Even Margaret seemed remarkably relaxed. She sat quietly near one of the windows, her small leather briefcase resting beside her chair, exactly where she had placed it hours earlier. Nobody paid it any attention. That was exactly as she intended. Dessert arrived just after sunset. The caterers served slices of 3-tier wedding cake, while coffee filled delicate porcelain cups. Then the master of ceremonies stepped toward the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen. The room gradually became quiet. Before we begin dancing, our beautiful bride would like to say a few words. Applause filled the room. Vanessa accepted the microphone with effortless confidence. She looked completely at ease. She had always enjoyed speaking in front of people. When she was 12 years old, she had memorized an entire Christmas program at church after only 2 rehearsals. Public attention never frightened her. She smiled warmly around the room. Thank you all for being here. More applause. This has truly been the happiest day of our lives. Nathan squeezed her hand. She smiled at him. I honestly don't know where to begin. She laughed softly. So many people helped make today possible. She thanked the caterers, the florist, the wedding planner, our pastor, Nathan's parents. Several bridesmaids wiped away tears. The speech was heartfelt, natural, beautiful. Then she turned toward me. And finally, her smile grew even brighter. I want to thank the most generous woman I've ever known. Dozens of heads turned toward me. I smiled politely. My wonderful mother. People applauded. I stood and gave a small wave. Vanessa continued. Everything you've seen today. She slowly turned in a circle. This beautiful house. The place where Nathan and I will begin the next chapter of our lives. Exists because of her love. The room remained completely silent. She lifted her champagne glass. My mother has given us the greatest wedding gift anyone could ever receive. She paused dramatically. Our family home. Thunderous applause exploded throughout the house. People stood. Someone whistled. Nathan looked overwhelmed. His eyes filled with tears. He stood beside Vanessa and embraced her tightly before turning toward me. Thank you. He spoke into the microphone without hesitation. Laverne. His voice trembled. I don't even know how to express my gratitude. The guests applauded even louder. Several people dabbed their eyes with napkins. Nathan continued. I promise we'll honor everything you and Thomas built here. My heart broke. Not because of what he said, because I knew he believed every single word. He wasn't celebrating deception. He was celebrating a gift he honestly thought had been freely given. Then one of Nathan's business associates stood. To the happy couple, he raised his glass. And to many successful years at Hollowell House. More applause. Another investor laughed. I can't wait for the first charity gala here. Someone else called out, this property is perfect for exclusive events. The comment spread through the room almost playfully. Luxury weddings, corporate dinners, historic tours, weekend retreats. Each suggestion built upon the next. Each guest unknowingly repeated the future Vanessa had quietly promised for months. I looked toward Margaret. She met my eyes. Didn't move, didn't speak. She simply waited. The room eventually settled again. Vanessa smiled at me across dozens of cheering guests. There was confidence in her face, relief. Perhaps she believed the moment had finally made her story permanent. Perhaps she believed that once enough people accepted something as true, it became true. She held up her champagne glass one last time. Mom, her voice softened. Thank you for trusting us with your greatest treasure. Silence settled over the room. Every eye turned toward me. I slowly stood. My chair made almost no sound against the hardwood floor. The applause faded naturally. People smiled, expecting another emotional speech. I picked up my own glass. Not champagne, just sparkling water. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked first at Nathan, then at Vanessa, then around the room at more than 100 people who genuinely believed they had just witnessed one of the most generous wedding gifts imaginable. Many of them had admired this house all afternoon. Its craftsmanship, its history, its warmth. But very few had actually seen it. Not truly. I smiled, a calm, genuine smile. Thank you, I began softly. It means more to me than you know that so many of you have fallen in love with this home. Several guests nodded. It has welcomed our family for more than 4 decades. I paused. And every room holds a story. People listened quietly. So before we begin dancing, I glanced toward the staircase. I'd like to invite every one of you to do something special. The room leaned forward almost collectively. I would be honored to personally give all of you a tour of the house. A few guests exchanged excited looks. I continued smiling. I want you to see every room. The library, the workshop, the nursery, the attic, the places where this family's story was built. I looked at Vanessa, then at Nathan. Finally, I finished with the simplest sentence I had spoken all day. Because before anyone decides who this house belongs to, everyone deserves to know its whole story. For the first time all afternoon, Vanessa's smile disappeared. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence that followed my invitation was unlike any silence I had ever experienced. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was curious. People looked from me to Vanessa, then back again. Perhaps they assumed I had planned the tour all along. Perhaps they believed it was another charming surprise arranged for the wedding. Either way, smiles returned almost immediately. Oh, I'd love that, an elderly neighbor said. I've always wondered what the upstairs looks like, another guest added. Several people stood at once, setting down their dessert forks. The wedding planner glanced toward Vanessa for instructions. Vanessa hesitated for only a second before forcing another smile. Of course, she said brightly. Mom gives the best tours. Her voice sounded cheerful. Her eyes did not. Nathan slipped his hand into hers. This is a wonderful idea. I know, she replied softly, never taking her eyes off me. Margaret quietly rose from her chair without touching the leather briefcase beside her. Not yet. She simply joined the guests. I waited until everyone had gathered near the grand staircase. Nearly 80 people now stood inside the foyer. Some leaned against the carved walnut railing. Others admired the stained glass window above the landing. Cameras appeared. Someone began recording on a phone. I smiled warmly. Thank you all for indulging an old woman. Several guests laughed. I've always believed a home tells its story better than the people living inside it. I rested my hand on the smooth banister. My husband Thomas used to say that houses remember everything. I slowly ran my fingers along the polished wood. This staircase certainly does. A little girl, perhaps 8 years old, looked up at me. What does it remember? The innocence of the question made me smile. It remembers tiny feet. People chuckled. When my daughter Vanessa was 4 years old, she insisted on sliding down this banister every afternoon. Vanessa laughed despite herself. I did. You certainly did. I fell once. You fell twice. The room filled with gentle laughter. I spent weeks worrying you would break an arm. You worried too much. I probably did. For a brief moment, everything felt wonderfully normal. I began climbing the staircase. The guests followed. This walnut railing was almost beyond saving when Thomas and I bought the house. I paused halfway up. The previous owners wanted to replace it. I gently touched the polished surface. But Thomas spent 6 weekends restoring every inch by hand. Nathan leaned closer to inspect the wood. You can still see the original grain. Yes. He did incredible work. He believed old things deserved another chance. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. So do I. His answer lingered with me. Maybe that was one reason Vanessa had fallen in love with him. He genuinely appreciated history. He wasn't chasing appearances every second. The group continued upstairs. Our first stop was the hallway. Guests immediately noticed the pencil marks covering one section of the wall. Different dates, different heights, different handwriting. One woman smiled. You never painted over them. I couldn't. I pointed toward the smallest mark. Age 5. Then another. First grade. Another. Middle school. Then finally, one almost level with my own height. Senior year. Vanessa walked forward almost unconsciously. She traced one of the marks with her fingertip. I forgot these were still here. I never could bring myself to erase them. She looked strangely emotional. I remember Dad measuring me. So do I, Nathan smiled. We should preserve these forever. I looked at him. They already are. The group moved into the first bedroom. This was Vanessa's room. Soft laughter spread through the crowd. Several stuffed animals still rested on a high shelf. A faded rocking chair remained beside the window. I know she's 35 now, I said, but somehow I never had the heart to change everything. One bridesmaid laughed. She was obsessed with horses. Vanessa groaned. Oh no, I smiled. Completely obsessed. I opened the closet. Inside hung a tiny denim jacket, a pair of worn riding boots, an old science fair ribbon. Guests smiled as though they were flipping through a family album. The atmosphere remained warm, comfortable, exactly as I had hoped. Nothing about today needed to become ugly. We continued down this hallway. The guest room, the sewing room, the upstairs reading nook. Every stop carried another memory, another story, another reminder that this house had never been built by money alone. Eventually, we reached the back staircase leading toward the workshop above the detached garage. I opened the heavy wooden door. A faint scent of cedar still lingered inside. Thomas's workshop remained almost untouched. His workbench, his hand planes, his chisels, his collection of antique hammers, everything sat exactly where he had left it. Several guests removed their hats instinctively. No one spoke for several moments. Nathan walked slowly toward the workbench. He built all this, most of it. I picked up an old wooden level. He found this at a flea market for $3. Someone laughed softly. He spent 40 hours restoring it. More gentle laughter. He said buying new tools was easy, but rescuing old ones taught patience. Nathan looked around with genuine admiration. I wish I'd met him. So do I. For the first time all afternoon, my voice almost broke. I took a slow breath before continuing. This room reminds me that everything valuable demands time. I looked around at the guests. Houses, families, marriages, trust. None of those things appear overnight. They are built, one careful choice after another. The room remained completely silent. Not awkward, reflective. Even Vanessa seemed absorbed in memories she hadn't visited for years. As we walked back toward the main house, one of Nathan's investors approached me. A tall man named Richard Collins. He smiled warmly. Mrs. Hollowell, please. Laverne. Laverne. He gestured toward the workshop. I had no idea your husband restored everything himself. He loved preserving history. Richard nodded. That explains why Nathan has been so excited. I tilted my head slightly. Excited. He told me this property would remain exactly as your family preserved it. I glanced briefly toward Nathan. He smiled politely, unaware of the conversation. Richard continued. That authenticity is priceless. I answered carefully. It certainly is. As our group returned inside, guests seemed noticeably quieter. The tour had changed something. The house no longer felt like a luxury asset. It felt personal, alive. Every room carried fingerprints of people they had never met. Every hallway echoed with stories rather than square footage. That was exactly what I wanted. Not sympathy, understanding. There was only one place left, the private study. Very few people had ever entered that room. Thomas called it the heart of the house. Not because it was beautiful, because everything important eventually found its way there. Family letters, insurance policies, mortgage papers, birth certificates, our wills. Every chapter of our lives rested behind one solid oak door. I stopped outside it. The guests naturally gathered behind me. The hallway had become completely silent again. Vanessa finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but I recognized the tension beneath it. Mom, do we really need to show everyone your office? I turned toward her with the same gentle smile I had worn all afternoon. Yes. Why? Because every family story deserves an ending. Her expression changed, just slightly. Not fear, recognition. For the first time that day, I think she finally understood exactly where the tour was leading. I reached for the polished brass doorknob. Behind that door rested decades of memories, and something else, the truth. My hand rested on the brass doorknob for a moment before I turned it. The study door opened with the familiar creak Thomas had always insisted on leaving unfixed. It's supposed to sound old, he used to joke whenever I suggested oiling the hinges. A house this age deserves a little personality. Several guests smiled as they stepped inside. Unlike the rest of the house, the study had never been redesigned for modern tastes. Dark walnut bookshelves covered 3 walls from floor to ceiling. A large oak desk stood beneath tall windows overlooking the back garden. Thomas's leather chair remained exactly where he had pushed it back the last afternoon he had ever worked there. His reading glasses still rested beside an unfinished crossword puzzle. No one spoke. The room carried a quiet dignity that seemed to ask for respect without demanding it. One of Nathan's elderly uncles whispered softly, "It feels like he's still here." I smiled. Some days. I think he is. Guests slowly spread throughout the room. Some admired old photographs. Others examined framed architectural drawings of the house before its restoration. Children wandered quietly between shelves filled with history books and leather-bound family albums. Nathan walked toward one photograph sitting on the desk. It showed Thomas and me standing in front of the house nearly 40 years earlier. Our clothes were covered with paint. Our smiles were enormous. You both looked so happy. We were exhausted. Everyone laughed gently. But yes, we were happy. I stepped beside the desk and rested one hand upon its polished surface. This room became our family's record book. I opened the top drawer. Inside rested dozens of carefully labeled folders: birth certificates, insurance policies, letters, mortgage statements, receipts dating back decades. Thomas believed paperwork deserved almost as much care as the house itself. If you organize your life, he'd often say, you rarely have to defend it. At the time, I thought he simply disliked clutter. Now those words carried an entirely different meaning. I removed a worn leather binder. Its corners had softened with age. This, I held it up carefully, contains nearly every major milestone this house has ever experienced. Guests leaned forward with quiet curiosity. I opened the first page. A faded black and white photograph appeared. The day we bought the house. I passed it to the nearest guests. People smiled as they examined the image. The roof looked worn. The porch sagged noticeably, paint peeled from nearly every surface. It hardly looks recognizable. It wasn't, I laughed softly. The plumbing barely worked. The roof leaked. The wiring frightened every electrician who visited. Nathan smiled. And you still bought it. We fell in love with what it could become. I turned another page. Receipts, old permits, inspection reports, handwritten renovation notes in Thomas's careful handwriting. One guest laughed. He documented everything. He certainly did. Another page. Canceled mortgage checks, insurance claims after storms, receipts for lumber, historic preservation permits. Decades of ordinary paperwork. Normally boring. Today strangely fascinating. Richard Collins, the investor I'd spoken with during the tour, looked genuinely impressed. I've never seen anyone keep records this complete. I smiled. My husband taught history. He believed details mattered. Richard nodded appreciatively. They certainly do. I slowly closed the binder. Then I looked toward Margaret. She understood immediately. Without a single word, she stepped forward carrying her leather briefcase. The room gradually became silent again. Vanessa's shoulders stiffened. Nathan looked from Margaret to me, his expression shifting from curiosity to mild confusion. Margaret placed the briefcase gently upon the desk. She opened the brass clasps, removed a neatly organized folder, then looked toward me. "Whenever you're ready." I nodded. "Thank you." Turning back toward our guests, I smiled as warmly as I could. "I've shared many happy memories today." Heads nodded throughout the room. "But there's one final piece of this house's story." I paused. "And it's probably the most important." Vanessa suddenly stepped forward. "Mom." Her voice sounded pleasant, almost too pleasant. "Maybe we should save the paperwork for another day." I looked at her calmly. "Why?" "The guests don't need legal documents." Several people shifted uncomfortably. Nathan glanced between us. I answered gently. "Actually, I think they do." Vanessa laughed nervously. "I don't understand." "I know." Margaret quietly handed me a certified document. The official county seal shimmered beneath the afternoon light. I held it carefully. "This is the current ownership record for this property." Nathan frowned slightly. "Ownership record?" I nodded. "Yes." He smiled politely. "I've never actually seen one before." "I imagine not." Vanessa interrupted quickly. "Mom, I really don't think—" I raised one hand, not angrily, simply asking for a moment. She fell silent. I looked around the room. My daughter thanked me a few minutes ago for giving her and Nathan this house as their wedding gift. Several guests smiled. They had heard the speech. They remembered. I continued quietly. "Many of you congratulated them." More nods. "Several of you even thanked me for my generosity." Richard raised his glass slightly. "Guilty." Gentle laughter rippled through the room. I smiled. "So before everyone leaves today, I think I owe you complete honesty." The room became perfectly still. I unfolded the certified document. "The Charleston County Register of Deeds confirms that the sole legal owner of this property—" I paused only long enough to meet Nathan's eyes— "is Laverne Hollowell." Silence. No applause. No whispers. Just silence. Nathan blinked. He looked toward Vanessa, then back at me. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." I continued speaking calmly. "I have never transferred ownership. I have never signed a deed. I have never given this house to anyone." Vanessa immediately stepped forward. "Mom." "No." Her voice sharpened. "This is a misunderstanding." I looked at her with genuine sadness. "No, sweetheart. It isn't." Nathan stared at the document still resting in my hands. "I thought—" His voice became almost inaudible. "I thought everything had already been arranged." It hadn't. He looked completely lost. "You mean, this isn't our house?" I answered softly. "It never has been." The color slowly drained from his face. He turned toward Vanessa. What is she talking about? Vanessa laughed nervously. It's complicated. Nathan didn't smile. No. He spoke more firmly. It isn't. He pointed toward the certified document. Either we own the house, or we don't. No one moved. Even the children had stopped whispering. The room felt impossibly still. Vanessa tried again. I was going to explain everything after the wedding. Nathan stared at her. Explain what? She hesitated. I assumed. You assumed. I thought Mom would eventually. Eventually, he interrupted. You told me it was already ours. No answer. Richard Collins quietly removed his glasses. Several guests exchanged confused glances. Someone near the doorway whispered, "Oh my goodness." Margaret finally spoke for the first time. Her voice remained calm. For the sake of clarity, she placed several additional certified copies across the desk. The ownership history has remained unchanged. No transfer has ever occurred. No deed has ever been recorded. These are certified public records. Nathan slowly picked up one copy. His hands visibly trembled. He read the first page, then the second, then looked toward Vanessa again. His expression no longer showed confusion, only disbelief. Laverne. He turned back toward me. His voice cracked. Did you ever promise us this house? I met his eyes. No. Not once. And did you ever ask me to move in? No. He lowered the document slowly. For several long seconds, he simply stood there. Then he whispered the sentence that broke my heart almost as much as it broke his. I built our entire future around something that was never true. Nobody answered him. Because there was nothing left to say. The truth had finally entered the room. And once it did, there was no place left for the lie to hide. No one reached for a champagne glass. No one spoke above a whisper. The celebration that had filled every room only minutes earlier seemed to vanish without anyone noticing exactly when it left. I looked around the study and saw expressions I would never forget. Confusion, embarrassment, sympathy, disbelief. Most of all, I saw people trying to reconcile two completely different versions of the same story. Nathan remained frozen beside the desk, the certified deed still trembling slightly in his hands. He looked at the county seal again as though reading it one more time might somehow produce a different answer. It didn't. Finally, he lifted his eyes toward Vanessa. Tell me she's wrong. His voice was quiet. Not angry. Not yet. Just wounded. Vanessa swallowed. Nathan? No. He shook his head. Don't explain. Just answer. She glanced around the room. Dozens of people were watching. Family, friends, business associates, neighbors. She forced a nervous smile. It's more complicated than it looks. Nathan stared at her for several long seconds. Then he asked the simplest question possible. Does your mother still legally own this house? Silence. Vanessa. She slowly lowered her eyes. Yes. The word barely escaped her lips. Nathan closed his eyes. Several guests inhaled sharply. A woman near the doorway quietly covered her mouth with her hand. Someone whispered, "Oh Lord." Richard Collins, the investor, removed his reading glasses and rubbed his forehead. I don't understand. Vanessa quickly looked toward him. Richard, I can explain. He raised one hand. No. I think I'd rather listen first. She took a step toward Nathan. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Nathan didn't move. You told me the paperwork had already been completed. I thought it would be. You said your mother wanted us to have the house. I believed she eventually would. You said she had already decided. She couldn't finish the sentence. Nathan looked completely lost. You let me thank her. His voice cracked. You let me stand downstairs, in front of everyone, and thank her for a gift she'd never given. Every word struck harder than the one before. Vanessa reached for his hand. He quietly stepped backward, not dramatically, just enough to avoid the touch. That small movement hurt more than shouting ever could. Margaret remained silent. She knew the truth no longer required her assistance. The documents had done their work. A middle-aged woman wearing a navy dress slowly raised her hand. It was Nathan's Aunt Denise. Laverne, may I ask something? Of course. Were you ever planning to give them the house? I answered honestly. One day. I intended to leave it as part of my estate. Several people nodded. I never hid that. But I also never promised it. And I certainly never intended to give away my home while I was still living in it. Denise quietly nodded. That makes sense. Richard stepped forward. His expression had changed completely. Professional. Measured. Vanessa. She looked toward him. You and I had 3 meetings. Yes. You presented preliminary concepts for luxury historical events. She remained silent. You referred to the property as your family's newest hospitality investment. You introduced Nathan as your future business partner. No answer. Richard continued. You never once mentioned that ownership remained entirely with your mother. The room grew even quieter. Finally, Vanessa whispered, I thought everything would work out. Richard sighed. In business, hope isn't due diligence. He carefully placed his business card on the desk. I think we should postpone every conversation we've been having. He didn't sound angry. He sounded disappointed. That somehow felt worse. Another investor, Allison Grant, spoke next. We've already spent weeks discussing fundraising galas. Vanessa nodded weakly. I know. We reserved tentative dates. I know. We began budget projections. I know. Allison looked genuinely saddened. Why didn't you simply tell us the truth? Vanessa wiped tears from her eyes. I wanted everyone to believe in the dream. Allison answered softly. A dream built on something untrue eventually becomes a nightmare. No one argued with her. Nathan finally spoke again. When did this start? Vanessa looked at him. When did you first know? She hesitated. The truth. He held up the certified deed. When did you first know this house wasn't yours? Several agonizing seconds passed. Then she whispered, months ago. Nathan stared at her. Months, she nodded. I asked Mom to sign paperwork. My heart tightened. Nathan slowly turned toward me. Those documents, I nodded. They transferred immediate ownership. He looked back at Vanessa. You knew she refused. Yes. You knew she never signed. Yes. You knew every time you talked about renovations. Every time you told me to sketch designs. Every time you discussed event bookings. None of it was actually ours. Vanessa began crying openly. I thought she'd change her mind. Nathan's expression hardened for the first time that day. So you never told me. I was afraid. Afraid of what? That you'd leave. The sentence echoed through the room. Nathan looked stunned. You thought I'd marry a house? No. You thought I'd marry property? She couldn't answer. He slowly shook his head. You don't know me at all. Those 6 words seemed to drain the last strength from Vanessa. She sank into one of the leather chairs beside the desk. No one moved toward her. Not because no one cared, because everyone understood this was no longer something another person could fix. Pastor Samuel finally stepped forward. His voice remained calm and compassionate. May I say something? Everyone nodded. He looked first at Nathan, then Vanessa, then me. I've officiated weddings for nearly 30 years. I've seen marriages begin with almost nothing. And I've seen marriages begin with enormous wealth. He paused. The successful ones always had one thing in common. Trust. He let the word settle. Money can be earned. Houses can be purchased. Businesses can recover. But trust? He slowly shook his head. Must be rebuilt one honest choice at a time. Nathan lowered his eyes. I don't even know what was real anymore. I couldn't bear hearing that. Nathan. He looked at me. You asked me earlier whether I had ever promised you this house. Yes. I'm going to answer another question you never asked. He remained silent. If you had come to me and asked whether you and Vanessa could someday build your future here, I would have listened. His eyes widened slightly. If you had told me the truth, we might have found a way together. The room became completely still. I continued. But I cannot reward deception simply because it comes from someone I love. Tears filled my eyes. I lost my husband. I refuse to lose my integrity too. Nathan slowly nodded. I understand. Those two words carried no resentment, only sorrow. Vanessa buried her face in her hands. For the first time that day, she stopped trying to defend herself. She simply cried, real tears, not because she had been embarrassed, not because the investors were leaving, not because the wedding celebration had collapsed, but because perhaps for the first time, she finally understood what her choices had actually cost. Around the room, guests quietly began leaving the study. No one rushed. No one whispered gossip. Many paused to squeeze my shoulder. Others offered gentle words to Nathan. Several simply walked out in respectful silence. The celebration downstairs still existed. The music still played. The candles still burned. But everyone knew the wedding had changed forever. Not because the truth had ruined the day, because the lie had finally run out of places to hide. For several minutes after people began leaving the study, no one seemed to know what they were supposed to do next. The reception downstairs continued almost by habit. The quartet still played soft jazz. The caterers quietly cleared dessert plates. Candles continued flickering on the dining tables. Yet the laughter that had filled the house only an hour earlier had disappeared. No dramatic scene unfolded. No guests rushed for the exits. Instead, conversations became quieter, more thoughtful. People spoke in small groups, choosing their words carefully. It struck me that truth often changes a room more completely than anger ever can. I remained in the study for a few moments, gathering the documents Margaret had spread across the desk. She helped me return each certified record to its folder. Neither of us felt any need to speak. Eventually, she closed the briefcase and looked at me. You handled that exactly the way Thomas would have hoped. I smiled sadly. I kept wondering if I should have said less. You didn't attack anyone. I know. You simply answered questions. I know. She rested a hand on my shoulder. The truth defended itself. I nodded quietly. Across the room, Nathan still stood near the bookshelf. His wedding jacket remained perfectly pressed, but his shoulders had changed. Only an hour earlier, he had looked like a man beginning a new chapter. Now he looked like someone trying to determine whether the chapter he thought he was living had ever existed at all. I walked over slowly. Nathan. He turned immediately. I'm so sorry. The apology surprised me. For what? I should have asked more questions. I gently shook my head. You trusted the woman you loved. I still should have asked. No. You had every reason to believe her. He lowered his eyes. I feel like a fool. No. I waited until he looked back at me. Being deceived doesn't make someone foolish. Choosing to deceive someone does. His eyes filled again. I honestly believed you wanted this. I know. I thought every conversation we had about the house, every renovation idea, every sketch, was part of a future we'd already agreed on. I know. I would never have made those plans if I'd known. I believe you. He let out a long breath. I never cared about getting a free house. I know. I loved the history. I know. I loved what you and Thomas built. I know. His voice cracked. I thought one day we would take care of it for you. That sentence hurt because I knew it was true. Nathan had imagined stewardship. Vanessa had imagined ownership. Those two ideas sounded similar. They weren't. Behind us, footsteps echoed softly across the hardwood floor. Vanessa had finally entered the study. Her makeup had been ruined by tears. The carefully arranged curls around her face had begun falling loose. For the first time all day, she looked less like a bride and more like the frightened little girl who used to hide behind my legs whenever thunderstorms rolled across Charleston. She stopped several feet away. Nathan. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he quietly folded the certified deed and placed it back on the desk. Finally, he looked at her. I need to understand. I know. No. He shook his head. I don't think you do. His voice remained calm. Almost painfully calm. Tell me one thing, she nodded. When you asked me to start drawing renovation plans, did you already know your mother hadn't signed those papers? Vanessa closed her eyes. Yes. When you introduced me to investors, did you already know? Yes. When you told me your mother wanted us to build our future here, did you already know? She whispered. Yes. Nathan looked away for several seconds. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried no anger, only heartbreak. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. I was afraid. You've said that. I didn't want to lose you. He gave a sad smile. You nearly lost yourself instead. Those words seemed to strike her harder than anything else had. She began crying again. I kept thinking, once we were married, everything would somehow work itself out. Nathan slowly shook his head. Marriage isn't magic. It doesn't make lies disappear. It makes them harder to escape. Silence settled over the room again. Finally, I stepped toward my daughter. She looked at me cautiously, perhaps expecting another lecture, another accusation. Instead, I simply asked, "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. When did you stop believing I would help you if you were honest? Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I don't know. You used to tell me everything. I know. You used to come home crying over broken friendships. I know. You used to ask your father for advice before every difficult decision. I know. So when did that change? She stared at the floor. I think. She struggled to continue. After I started working with people who measured success differently, I remained silent. They all seemed to have more. Bigger homes, vacation houses, investment properties. They talked about wealth like it was proof that you mattered. She wiped her eyes. I felt embarrassed. Embarrassed. I felt like I never had enough. I looked around the study. You grew up in this house. I know. You never went hungry. I know. You graduated without student loans because your father and I saved for years. I know. You were loved every single day of your life. I know. So what exactly wasn't enough? Her answer came almost immediately. Everyone else's lives looked bigger. There it was. Not greed. Comparison. One of the oldest traps in the world. Nathan listened quietly. Vanessa continued. I convinced myself that eventually the house would be mine anyway. So I started thinking about it like it already was. She looked toward me. I didn't even notice when imagining became assuming. I felt my heart soften, not because her choices suddenly became acceptable, but because at last she was telling the truth. Margaret quietly excused herself, sensing the conversation had become deeply personal. Pastor Samuel followed. Within moments, only the three of us remained. Nathan spoke first. You should have trusted me. I know. If you had told me your mother hadn't decided anything yet, I would have said we could buy our own home. Vanessa looked stunned. You would... He almost laughed. Of course. I love this house because of its history. Not because I expected to own it. He paused. I wanted to build a life with you. Not inherit someone else's. Vanessa covered her face again. I'm sorry. I know. No. She looked up. I mean it. I know. I lied. Yes. I lied to you. Yes. I lied to Mom. Yes. I lied to everyone. No one argued, because that part no longer required discussion. She had finally admitted it herself. Nathan slowly removed his wedding ring. He didn't place it on the desk. He simply held it in his palm. I don't know what happens next. Neither did I. Neither did Vanessa. The future suddenly looked very different from the one everyone had celebrated that morning. But for the first time that day, it was built on truth. And somehow, despite all the pain surrounding us, that felt like the first solid foundation anyone had stood on in months. No one said another word for nearly a minute. The silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that follows an earthquake when people are still standing, but quietly checking whether the ground beneath them can still be trusted. Nathan slowly slipped his wedding ring back onto his finger. Not because everything had been forgiven, because removing it in the middle of a conversation would have been another emotional decision made before careful thought. He looked at Vanessa. "I'm not taking this off today." She looked at him hopefully. "But I'm also not pretending nothing happened." Her shoulders sank again. "I understand." "No," he answered gently. "I don't think you do." He walked toward the window overlooking the backyard where guests were quietly gathering in small groups. The band had stopped playing. Several children chased bubbles across the lawn, blissfully unaware that the adults inside the house were trying to rebuild an entire reality. Nathan folded his arms. "My parents divorced when I was 14. Neither Vanessa nor I had ever heard him tell that story. My father lied constantly. Nothing dramatic. Little things. Business meetings that weren't really business meetings. Money that wasn't where he said it was. Promises he never intended to keep." He smiled sadly. Each lie sounded small. "But eventually my mother stopped believing everything." He turned toward Vanessa. "I promised myself I'd never build a marriage where either person had to wonder whether the other was telling the truth." Vanessa nodded through tears. "I remember you telling me that." "I did. So why?" She looked down at the floor. "I wish I knew." "You do know." She remained silent. "You just don't like the answer." That sentence settled heavily between them. Finally, she whispered, "I wanted people to admire us." Nathan closed his eyes. "Us. Or you?" She couldn't answer. I walked slowly toward the bookshelf where Thomas had always kept our family photo albums. Without saying anything, I removed one thick leather-bound album and placed it on the desk. Neither of them noticed at first. I opened it to a photograph taken nearly 20 years earlier. Vanessa stood beside Thomas holding a blue ribbon from her middle school science fair. She wasn't wearing expensive clothes. She wasn't standing in front of a mansion. She wasn't surrounded by luxury. She looked happier than I had seen her in years. "Do you remember this?" She stepped closer. "Of course. You cried because your volcano exploded too early." She laughed softly through her tears. "I was so embarrassed." "What did your father say?" She stared at the photograph. "He said..." A faint smile appeared. "Then we'll build another volcano." I nodded. "He never asked whether the judges would still admire you." She looked at me. "He only cared that we kept trying." Another page. Her high school graduation. Another page. College move-in day. Another. Christmas morning. Vacation at Tybee Island. None of the photographs showed wealth. They showed laughter, messy kitchens, campfires, picnics, birthdays, ordinary happiness. I closed the album. "You spent your whole childhood believing love was enough." She wiped her eyes. "When did admiration become more important?" For a long time she couldn't answer. Finally she whispered, "I think after Dad died." I felt my heart tighten. She continued speaking slowly, choosing every word carefully. "When he was alive, I never cared what anyone else had. Home already felt complete." She looked around the study. "After he was gone, everything felt smaller. I started working with people who judged success by neighborhoods, cars, vacation homes. They talked about inheritance like it was a competition." She laughed bitterly. "I started comparing our life to theirs." Nathan listened quietly. I told myself I wasn't jealous. But every time someone asked where we planned to live, I imagined this house. She looked directly at me. Then imagining became expecting, and expecting became believing. Her voice broke. And eventually, I stopped noticing the difference. I walked closer until we stood only a few feet apart. "You know what hurts me most?" She nodded weakly. "No. It's not the paperwork. It's not the speeches. It's not even the assumptions." Fresh tears rolled down her face. "It's that somewhere along the way, you decided you couldn't trust your own mother enough to ask honestly." She covered her mouth. "I know. If you had come to me and said, 'Mom, we're struggling to buy a house,' I would have listened. If you had said, "Can we live here temporarily?" I would have listened. If you had asked, "Can we create a long-term plan together?" I would have listened. She began sobbing. But you never gave me the chance. No, I didn't. You decided the answer before asking the question. She slowly nodded. Yes, I did. Nathan finally stepped back toward us. Laverne. Yes. I need you to hear something. I'm listening. He took a deep breath. I love your daughter. I looked at Vanessa. I know. But love isn't enough to erase today. No, it isn't. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. Neither do I. He smiled faintly. That's probably the first completely honest thing anyone has said all afternoon. Despite everything, the three of us shared a tiny, exhausted laugh. Outside the study, gentle footsteps approached. Carol knocked softly. Laverne, come in. She entered cautiously. I didn't want to interrupt. You aren't. She looked around the room before focusing on Vanessa. Without saying a word, she crossed the room and hugged her niece tightly. Vanessa collapsed into her arms. I'm so ashamed. Carol stroked her hair. I know. I ruined everything. Carol gently pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. No. You damaged something. There's a difference. Vanessa looked confused. Damaged things can sometimes be repaired. Ruined things can't. She glanced toward me. The question is whether everyone involved is willing to repair them. Nathan answered honestly. I don't know yet. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply true. And somehow truth, even painful truth, felt gentler than false reassurance. I looked around the study once more. The documents remained neatly stacked. The photographs lay open. Thomas's old chair still faced the window exactly as it had for years. I suddenly remembered something he once told Vanessa after she accidentally broke one of his favorite wooden picture frames. She had cried for an hour, convinced she had destroyed something precious. Thomas simply smiled. You know what makes wood special? What? It can be repaired. She had frowned. But you'll still see the crack. Yes, he smiled again. That's how you know someone cared enough to fix it. Standing there, I finally understood what he had meant. Trust could never become untouched again. The crack would always exist. But perhaps, if enough honesty followed, it didn't have to remain broken forever. I looked at my daughter. I'm not ready to decide what our future looks like. She nodded. I understand. But I am ready to tell you one thing. She waited. I still love you. She burst into tears again. And because I love you, I'm going to let you earn back what today almost destroyed. For the first time since the truth came out, I saw something in her eyes that had been missing for a very long time. Not entitlement, not fear, not pride, humility. It wasn't the end of our story, but at last, it felt like the beginning of a different one. The wedding photographs were beautiful. Months later, when people who hadn't attended the reception looked through the album, they saw exactly what every bride hopes to remember. Sunlight filtering through ancient oak trees. A smiling couple standing beneath white roses. Family members laughing. Elegant tables glowing beneath candlelight. No camera captured the conversations inside the study. No photograph showed the certified deed lying across Thomas's old desk. No picture preserved the silence that followed the truth. Perhaps that was for the best. Some memories belong to the heart rather than an album. The morning after the wedding, the house felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in weeks, no delivery trucks arrived. No florists knocked at the door. No planners hurried through the hallway carrying clipboards. The only sounds came from birds outside my bedroom window and the familiar ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. I carried a cup of coffee onto the back porch where Thomas and I had spent countless mornings watching the sunrise. The garden looked almost untouched despite the previous day's celebration. Only a few scattered flower petals remained beneath the oak tree. Evidence that joy and sorrow had occupied the same place only hours apart. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Nathan. I answered immediately. Good morning. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. There was a long pause. I've been thinking all night. I imagine you have. I wanted to tell you something before rumors started traveling faster than the truth. I appreciated that. Go ahead. We postponed our honeymoon. I'm sorry. So am I. Another pause. We need time. I understand. I also wanted you to hear this directly from me. I'm listening. I'm not leaving Vanessa. His answer surprised me. I won't pretend yesterday didn't happen. But I'm also not walking away from my marriage after one day. I closed my eyes briefly. Part of me felt relieved. What are you going to do? We're going to start over. Really start. No pretending. No shortcuts. No imagined future. Just the life we can actually afford. I smiled quietly. I think Thomas would have liked you. Nathan laughed softly. I wish I'd had the chance to meet him. So do I. Before ending the call, he added one more sentence. I'll earn everything from now on. You don't have to prove anything to me. I know. I'm proving it to myself. That afternoon, Vanessa called. Unlike previous conversations, she didn't sound rushed. She didn't sound confident. She simply sounded tired. Mom? Yes. May I come over? I looked around the quiet house. Of course. She arrived 30 minutes later. Not in designer clothes, not carrying folders, not answering business calls every few minutes. She wore blue jeans, an old university sweatshirt, and almost no makeup. For the first time in years, she looked like herself. She stood awkwardly on the front porch. I'm sorry. I know. No. She shook her head. I've been saying those words without really explaining them. I stepped aside. Come in. She walked slowly through the foyer. Her eyes wandered across the staircase, the family photographs, the restored woodwork, everything she had nearly stopped seeing because she had become so focused on owning it. We sat in the kitchen, the same place where she had once asked me to sign those papers, the same table where Margaret first uncovered the truth. She looked at the empty chair where Thomas always used to sit. I kept thinking about Dad. So did I. He would have been disappointed. I nodded. He also would have loved you enough to help you become better. Fresh tears appeared. I don't deserve that. Perhaps not. But love isn't earned by perfection. She looked at me. It's earned by choosing honesty after failure. She slowly nodded. I've already started. What do you mean? I called Richard Collins. And I apologized. He appreciated that. I called Allison too. And the other investors. I told every one of them exactly what happened. I listened quietly. I also contacted the wedding guests who heard my speech. She looked embarrassed. I wrote individual letters. What did you say, the truth? She pulled several folded pages from her purse. I admitted I misrepresented the house. I apologized for placing everyone in an impossible situation. I told them you never promised us anything. I looked at the letters for several seconds before speaking. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. But every letter made me feel a little lighter. I smiled. That's how honesty usually works. Over the next several weeks, small changes began appearing. Not dramatic ones, the kind that mattered. Nathan and Vanessa rented a modest two-bedroom townhouse on the other side of Charleston. It wasn't historic. It wasn't grand. It certainly wasn't featured in magazines. But every piece of furniture inside had been purchased together. Every payment came from their own earnings. Every improvement reflected decisions they made honestly. One Saturday afternoon, they invited me over. Nathan proudly showed me the tiny vegetable garden they had planted beside the patio. We only have room for tomatoes and herbs. I laughed. Thomas started exactly the same way. Vanessa smiled. I remember. Nathan looked around proudly. We painted the living room ourselves. I ran my fingers along one wall. The edges weren't perfect. One corner clearly needed another coat. It reminded me of my first house with Thomas. It's beautiful. Vanessa looked surprised. Really? Yes. Why? Because you built it. She smiled through watery eyes. I finally understand what you meant. What? When you said a house costs more than money. Months passed. Sunday dinners quietly returned. Not every week at first. Sometimes every other week. Sometimes once a month. Healing rarely follows a schedule. One evening after dinner, Vanessa stayed behind while Nathan loaded leftovers into the car. We sat together on the back porch watching the sunset. I almost forgot. She reached into her purse. I brought something. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Nathan kneeling beside their tiny vegetable garden while Vanessa laughed behind him. Across the bottom she had written, "Our first home, built honestly." I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket. "It belongs in the family album." She smiled. "I hoped you'd say that." Before leaving, she hugged me tightly, longer than she had in years. "I don't expect everything to be fixed." It isn't. I know. But thank you for not giving up on me. I looked toward the old Victorian house standing proudly beneath the evening sky. Its walls had survived hurricanes, floods, termites, time itself. Perhaps families weren't so different. The strongest ones weren't the ones that never cracked. They were the ones willing to rebuild before the damage became permanent. As I watched Nathan and Vanessa drive away toward the small townhouse they now proudly called home, I realized something Thomas had understood all along. A real inheritance isn't measured by the value of the house someone receives. It's measured by the character they develop before they're ever trusted with the keys. 2 years passed more quickly than I expected. People often imagine healing as one dramatic moment, a tearful apology, a heartfelt embrace, or a single conversation that erases every wound. Life has never worked that way. At least it never has for me. Healing arrived quietly. It came through ordinary Tuesdays, shared meals, phone calls that lasted longer than 5 minutes, birthday cards signed with genuine affection instead of obligation. It came one honest decision at a time. That I eventually realized was exactly how trust had been lost. And it was also how trust returned. The old Victorian house remained exactly where it had always stood. Every spring, the hydrangeas bloomed along the brick walkway. Every autumn, the oak trees scattered golden leaves across the front lawn. Every Christmas, I placed Thomas's favorite wreath on the front door myself. Some neighbors still stopped to admire the stained glass windows. Tourists occasionally photographed the exterior without realizing anyone still lived there. Life moved forward, just not in the direction any of us had expected. Nathan and Vanessa never became wealthy. In fact, their first 2 years of marriage were probably harder than they had imagined. Interest rates climbed. Unexpected car repairs emptied their savings more than once. Nathan's company lost an important commercial contract. Vanessa accepted a different position with a nonprofit historical preservation organization. The salary was lower. Work mattered more. One evening, she told me something that made me smile. "I finally enjoy going to work again." What changed? "I stopped trying to impress people." She laughed softly. "It turns out helping restore old buildings feels a lot better than pretending to own one." That sentence told me more about her growth than any apology ever could. Nathan, meanwhile, continued restoring small historic properties throughout Charleston. Not because they made him rich, because he genuinely loved preserving stories. Sometimes he called me asking about old woodworking techniques Thomas had used. Other times he'd bring photographs of restored staircases or antique windows and ask, would Thomas have approved? My answer was almost always the same. He would have told you to sand it one more time. Nathan would laugh every single time. One Saturday afternoon, they invited me to their townhouse again. Except it wasn't really a townhouse anymore. Not emotionally. Flower boxes decorated every window. The little vegetable garden now stretched across the entire backyard. A handmade porch swing rested beneath a young maple tree. Inside, every room reflected patience rather than money. Bookshelves Nathan had built himself. Curtains Vanessa had sewn. Second-hand furniture carefully restored together on weekends. Nothing expensive. everything meaningful. As we finished dinner, Nathan disappeared upstairs for a moment. When he returned, he carried a small wooden box. I made this. He handed it to me. I opened the lid. Inside rested the old brass key Thomas had carried for decades. I looked up confused. I thought I'd lost this. Vanessa smiled. You left it at our house after dinner a few months ago. Nathan nodded. I wanted to give it back properly. I carefully lifted the key. The wood inside the box had been carved by hand. On the lid, Nathan had burned a simple sentence into the grain. A house is inherited, a home is earned. I couldn't speak for several seconds. Finally, I whispered, Thomas would have loved this. Nathan smiled. I hoped he would. Several months later, I met with Margaret again. This time there were no emergencies, no lawsuits, no property disputes, just coffee, paperwork, and friendship. So, she adjusted her glasses. Have you decided? I have. She slid a thick folder toward me. My estate plan. I reviewed every page carefully. Unlike the documents Vanessa once asked me to sign, I understood every single sentence. Because Margaret explained each one, patiently, clearly, without rushing. When I reached the section describing the house, I paused. Margaret looked at me. Any changes? I smiled. One. She waited. I'd like the house to remain in a family trust, she nodded. And, if Vanessa and Nathan still want to live here one day, they may. Margaret smiled gently. I thought you might say that. But, I continued, only after I'm gone. And only together. No one can sell it without the other's agreement. And they must preserve its historical character. Margaret laughed softly. Thomas would definitely approve of that clause. I think so too. Then I added one final sentence. And if they ever choose not to live here, the house will become a community preservation foundation. Margaret looked pleasantly surprised. That's generous. No, I smiled. It's practical. This house has spent more than a century taking care of families. If ours no longer needs it someday, perhaps another family will. When everything was signed, Margaret gathered the documents carefully. No regrets. I looked out the office window toward Charleston Harbor shimmering beneath the afternoon sun. None. Because inheritance had never really been about the building. It never had been. The real inheritance Thomas and I left behind wasn't hidden inside walls or written across property deeds. It lived inside every lesson our daughter had finally chosen to learn. Months later, on Thomas's birthday, all three of us stood together on the front porch. Nathan grilled hamburgers. Vanessa arranged flowers. I carried lemonade outside. At one point, I noticed them quietly measuring one of the old porch columns. What are you two doing? Nathan grinned. We're helping with maintenance. Vanessa laughed. We asked permission first. I smiled. Permission granted. We all laughed. As evening settled across Charleston, I watched them working side by side beneath the same oak trees that had shaded our family for decades. The future no longer looked exactly as I had once imagined. It looked better. Not because everything had become perfect, because everyone had become honest. Before going inside, I placed my hand against the weathered front door. The same door Thomas and I had walked through as nervous newlyweds. The same door where we carried Vanessa home as a baby. The same door through which truth had finally entered on her wedding day. I smiled toward the fading sunset. It still has good bones. For just a moment, I could almost hear Thomas laughing beside me. And somehow, that felt like